What if I told you that America's oldest and most prestigious university is required by federal and state law, as well as its own honor codes, to eject its arguably most famous professor? And what if I told you that some of his friends who are co-conspirators in the Epstein files also need similar treatment? And what if I told you that that university specifically refuses to do so? Oh, it's all true. All that and worse. This could easily be the worst video that I've done yet in terms of its sordid content. My name is Chris, and on this channel, I remember things because someone has to. A lot of the richest, most powerful people in the United States and a lot of the big names, hotshots for the last few decades in academia have been involved in a variety of sex crimes in the service of a foreign government. It's a lot to take in all at once. I'm going to have to start this video with more than my usual number of caveats. The first one is that I'll point out that we're talking about people who are involved in literal criminal conspiracy. And when you talk about that, actual conspiracies do exist. It's a charge. You could be charged with conspiracy. You should ask a Harvard law professor. When you're dealing with that, there's two ways you can kind of approach it. You can make broad statements and not provide the receipts. You could not go into detail about it, in which case it looks like you could just be making things up. Perhaps you're a crazy person. Or the other route is you can go through excruciating detail of exactly what you're talking about and provide the receipts, in which case you begin to look like a different variety of lunatic. There's no winning. So I'm going the Charlie route here. I am going to provide a decent amount of detail and do a fairly deep dive. So I am going to, as a result, look like a little bit of a crazy person as we go down the rabbit hole of these varieties of malfeasance. The next thing that I have to deal with is the fact that we're going to be talking about people who have been committing these crimes and have been covering for these crimes, in part because of their devotion to the modern state of Israel. And any time that you bring that sort of thing up, you are immediately subject to charges of anti-Semitism. So there's also no winning here. I can either ignore that and plow straight ahead, in which case I'd just be accused of being a raging anti-Semite, or I could do the usual some of my best friends are, and still be accused of being a raging anti-Semite. There's no winning. I am sure that as soon as anybody who's Alan Dershowitz positive saw the title of the video, they've already labeled me an anti-Semite without even knowing if I'm an AI-generated voice. I will just point out, without belaboring it, that I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia. Philadelphia has been for 150 years or so one of the top 10 or 15 concentrations of Jews on the planet. It is where Reform Judaism was founded, and it is a major center, not just in the world, but especially specifically in the United States, of Jewish population and culture and so forth. Specifically, I grew up in a Catholic area of Northeast Philadelphia. I attended the public school system, which out of all proportion had large numbers in the 70s and 80s when I was a student, before the full extent of white flight and at maximum integration. There were large numbers of Jewish students and teachers and administrators. I grew up with an outsized proportion of Jewish friends, colleagues, fellow students, teachers, mentors, professors, employers. I did an internship with a Jewish American professor who was actually a strident critic of Israel, specifically because of the values that he was raised with, not in spite of them. I actually went to high school about 5 miles from where Benjamin Netanyahu went to high school. Not at the same time. He's a little bit older than me. But that'll give you some idea of the geography that we're talking about. I will also point out that most Zionists in the United States are Christians. There are tens of millions of Zionist Christians in the United States, most of them some variety of fundamentalist or evangelical Christian, and their superpower is numbers. It sure as hell ain't smarts, and it's largely not money. It's numbers. There's a large enough number of them that when they get out to vote, when somebody, beginning in the 1970s with Jerry Falwell's moral majority, there was a button to push to activate them as drones to go vote. You have a distribution in which, given the way that Congress is set up and given the way that presidential elections are set up with the Electoral College, that when you activate these people as a voting bloc, you end up with their will largely imposed on the world's hegemon. They are in an unholy alliance, pun intended, with about half of the Jewish population of America. When I was growing up, I believe Jews were about 3% of the American population. That's probably down to closer to 2% now with demographic trends. And fully about half of those people, some great organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace and others, are dead set against the actions of apartheid Israel and genocidal Israel, precisely because of the values that they grew up with. But there is a half that we are going to be talking about and concentrating on. A lot of these people have managed to concentrate themselves on largely on the Eastern Seaboard in positions of authority in academia, in government, and finance, and actually do a tremendous amount of work to promote Israel and to bend the foreign policy of the United States toward backing it. As I'm focusing on this group of people, we're going to notice a pattern that I find somewhat disturbing, and at the same time just intellectually interesting, even if it weren't impacting foreign policy. But you're going to see a pattern of name changes among Ashkenazi Jews. That is to say, people who are from largely Central and Eastern Europe, very white people from the same geography and sharing a lot of the same DNA as my Polish Catholic ancestors from the exact same region, who, like me, should not, you can see me, we're all people who shouldn't be spending overly much time in the sun in a place like, let's say, Israel. You may well be asking yourself, why should some clown named Chris have any opinion whatsoever as to what a bunch of Jews do with their names? And under normal circumstances, I'd say, yeah, that's a fair point. What's the point of that other than as an academic exercise? The problem is that this is very connected to a very specific movement of aggrievement, which has expressed itself, among other ways, in the neoconservative foreign policy movement. And that has been directing American foreign policy for a couple of generations now. The movement is almost entirely 100% Jewish, and specifically Ashkenazi Jews from the Pale of Settlement from the Russian Empire. And these are people who moved, largely their families moved into the United States prior to the Holocaust, and who have two primary enemies that they seem to be taking things out on in this psycho-social, cultural, ethno-religious tantrum that's been going on for decades. And those two groups of people would be Muslims in general, with a focus on Arabs and Iranians, and Russians, who are just perpetually, they are perpetually the enemy. and need to be punished in perpetuity for continuing to be Russian and to be occupying Russia, the temerity of it all. I attended the University of Pennsylvania. I was in the political science program, which is the Foreign Policy Research Institute connected. An inordinately high percentage of the professors there are in or were in or are affiliated with this demographic. I know this world entirely too well. Divert a country of 330 million people from very diverse backgrounds, a country that is supposed to have a secular government in its constitution. When you direct the only remaining world hegemon as a weapon for your personal, cultural, and religious tantrums to be acted out over generations, destroying country after country, killing millions of people, creating refugee populations, making Americans in general complicit in crimes that approach genocide or are genocidal. When you make Americans print $5 to $8 trillion of money and devalue the currency so that you can continue your religious forever wars, when you weaponize Judaism and Christianity within the United States in order to achieve that, and when I go to a European airport and I have to go to a special corner of the airport that's just for Americans and Israelis to get extra special, double secret probation patting down so that I can get on an airplane, then yeah, suddenly your name changes and your psychosocial, cultural, ethno-religious biases become my business. $5 to $8 trillion in, I'm allowed to have a say. I'll also point out that I shouldn't have to, I'm talking about people who are engaged in academic malfeasance, sexual crimes, including against minors, and a variety of what could be considered espionage and disloyalty crimes in the service of a foreign government. I'm not the one who should be apologizing or explaining myself here. At the center of this video, and in the words of the great Charles Fort, you could say that one draws a circle starting anywhere, but where I'm going to start is with Alan Dershowitz. And in case you're saying, my God, he's cherry-picked a horrible photo of that ogre, what I'm going to say to you is, well, it could be a lot worse. This is his Wikipedia entry photo. And there are two things noted about it, which I'll mention. One of which is that it's from 2009, meaning that he's 17 years older now, and I could only imagine 17 years more handsome. And that also there's the word retouched attached to this photo, meaning that he didn't look this good when the photo was taken. I'm displaying this in part so that you can understand when there's a victim of the Epstein files who names him specifically as somebody who repeatedly assaulted her, you have to imagine being an underage teenage girl who's having this leering down at you, drooling and probing and groping. I just want you to understand that that is the full horror of what we're talking about. The more I examine Alan Dershowitz, who has been arguably the most famous lawyer in the United States for pretty much my whole life, the more I'm realizing that there's not as much there as I thought there was. He's reportedly this great genius, but the closer I've been looking at it, it's incredible. I figured I'd do a little bit of background and ended up doing a deep dive on his career and his life. I need the mother of all showers now. And I started to see some interesting patterns and discovered some interesting facts. It has been my assumption for decades that Dershowitz had this incredibly successful defense career as a lawyer, either in private practice or maybe starting as a public defender, and that this parlayed its way into becoming a professor of law. And that's not what happened at all. As it turns out, Dershowitz, and I will give him credit for, I will give the man credit for two things here. One, he, unlike a lot of his Nepo baby friends, he's a self-made man. He came out of a middle-class background or the working class background, in fact, and graduated first in his class at Yale Law School, which is quite the accomplishment. And the second thing is, at least he kept the name Dershowitz. Unlike a lot of his colleagues and contemporaries, he didn't walk around claiming to be Dirk Bigdickton from a long line of English Bigdicktons. Now, Dershowitz graduates from Yale, and he gets 2 clerkships in Washington, D.C. in federal court, in circuit court there. And we should understand what a clerk is. That word kind of diminishes what it sounds like the job is. A clerk sounds like a mere secretary, and there are some secretarial tasks that you're doing for a judge. But what you're actually doing is a lot of legal research and a lot of preparing of briefs, and you're actually doing some brain work and doing some of the heavy lifting for the judge and making some judgment calls. So that's the kind of work that Dershowitz was doing for 2 different judges in D.C. for a few years, straight out of Yale. They went directly into that. What he did not do, interestingly, was he did not hang his own shingle as a lawyer. He didn't join a law firm. He was not on the ground floor of becoming a partner in the law firm, and he was not practicing as a private lawyer. He also was not a public defender, and he didn't work for a prosecutor's office either. He did none of that. So far as I can tell, in his early years, he didn't do so much as defend anybody from a parking ticket in traffic court. And I found that quite surprising. And after doing a couple of years of clerkship, Harvard recruited him to be at first an associate professor, and then made him the youngest full professor with tenure in an era when, in the 1960s, when professors could still get tenure, not like these days. But he got tenure at the age of 28. And he himself has described teaching at Harvard as the only actual full-time job that he's ever had. There is an old anti-teacher, anti-instructor adage that I find to be cruel that runs that those who can't do, teach. In the case of Dershowitz, it's those who never tried to do, teach. He spent decades preparing people at arguably the most prestigious law school in America to go out and be lawyers from a position of never having done that variety of work himself. The more I look at it, the more he seems to be a bit of a sort of a one-trick pony. He has attached himself to a lot of high-profile cases, and I've put together, I have over 40 pages of notes here for this whole sordid affair. And I put together a kind of a rubric, a bingo card, if you will, for how you become an Alan Dershowitz ward, how you become a client of his. And it seems like the more of these that you check off on a list, the more likely you are to be his client. The first thing is you should be rich. You should definitely be rich. You should have the resources to spend on a mountain of research and a mountain of legal bills. That's number one. Although a lot of those legal bills are not necessarily going to Dershowitz, who says that he works pro bono a lot of the time, because Dershowitz is typically not the lead counsel. He doesn't really do the heavy lifting, and he typically doesn't do the arguing in front of a judge. In Britain and in the British Commonwealth, they have a bifurcation in the way they describe lawyers. They say that somebody who is arguing in front of the judge is a barrister, and somebody who's doing behind-the-scenes work is a solicitor. And these are terms that we don't really use in American law. But Dershowitz has presented himself in media as the barrister role, when his actual role is usually more typically on the solicitor end. So you should be rich and you should be famous, because what Dershowitz has typically done is attach himself to very high-profile cases and gets his name out there, and then he writes books, and the books become bestsellers, and it seems like that is funding the law work. That seems to be that seems to be the business model here, is to use these cases to self-promote and then use your name recognition to get publishing contracts. If you can't be rich, you should at least be famous or infamous. You should have done a crime so heinous that it has attracted national media attention. It should be something flashy. Another square on the bingo card of being an Alan Dershowitz client is that you should very definitely harm women, women and or children. You should be, if you're not sexually assaulting women or minors, then you should be killing women or minors. Perhaps you can do both. Perhaps those minors can be female. But you should definitely have victims that are not male and not adults. He seems to prefer those. Another way to become an Alan Dershowitz client is to be guilty. And I don't just mean that like it's my opinion that you're guilty. I don't operate that way. I think that people have to be duly convicted in a court of law to be guilty. And that's what his clients are. These are largely, most of the time, most of his high profile cases, these are people who have already been found guilty by a jury of their peers. And the Dershowitz approach is then to pour over. See, he's not doing the initial defense of these clients. He's doing appeals. What he does is probably his interns, more realistically, his gophers are then pouring through the paperwork, the background of the prosecution and the procedure that went on, and they're looking for things that could have been argued as constitutional violations of the rights of somebody who was found guilty, typically of doing heinous crimes against women and or minors, and then figures out a way to get them off on technicalities. So there's all of that. Another interesting square on the bingo card of making yourself an Alan Dershowitz client is to change your name. You should definitely change your name. Whatever name you were given at birth, typically for religious reasons or to conceal your religious identity or for other wackadoo reasons, changing your name for whatever reasons is going to forward you on the rumble line of Alan Dershowitz clients. Be guilty and change your name, and you're good to go. And of course, another square on the bingo card is that it really helps to be Jewish. Dershowitz clients are Jewish out of all proportion to their general representation in the population, and this is just true. And it seems to be part of his culture of perpetual aggrievement. Just calling him as I see him. So I'm going to look at a list here of some of the Dershowitz high-profile cases. First would be Harry Reams, who in 1976 was charged by federal authorities, really pursued around the country by federal authorities because he was involved in and an actor in the pornographic film Deep Throat. And the feds really went after Harry Reams for distribution of obscenity, and this is one where I would actually find myself probably on constitutional grounds, probably agreeing with Dershowitz that they did Harry Reams dirty. Of course, Harry Reams not his real name; he changed his name, and Dershowitz did get his conviction overturned. Now, interestingly, if you look at the history of the production of that movie, the woman who is featured in it, the titular Throat, it reports that she was abused by Reams and coerced into making the film. So that checks off a few boxes on the Dershowitz client list, a pattern which will repeat. And that was back in 1976. In 1984, Dershowitz was able to overturn the conviction of Klaus von Bülow, a millionaire who attempted to kill his wife, Sunny von Bülow, twice, apparently by injecting her with overdoses of insulin. And in 1984, Dershowitz got von Bülow to walk. Leona Helmsley, from 1989 until 1992, was a Dershowitz client. Now, Leona Helmsley, as it turns out, not a real name, but she was famous as being the Queen of Mean. She was a multi-millionaire who faced a variety of tax evasion charges. Dershowitz came to her assistance after her tax evasion and fraud convictions. She famously was quoted by one of her servants as having said that taxes are for little people, people like me. We don't pay taxes. Dershowitz lost that one. She ended up serving 19 months. And then afterward, when she died, she left this massive foundation, which has turned out to be pumping the largest amount of private grants into Israel of any private fund. And she also left $12 million to her dog. Her dog was named Trouble, and that was, for you musical fans, spelled with a capital T. The evangelical televangelist Jim Bakker faced fraud and wire fraud charges in 1991. That's not what drew attention to the Jim Bakker case. And Jim Bakker eventually got sentenced. He got his sentence reduced from 45 years in prison to 6 years, and he served 5. And Dershowitz counts this as a partial win. It's always important that while you're committing financial crimes as a Dershowitz client, that one or more women is also used rudely. In 1992, he came to the appeal defense of heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson, who had been convicted of raping an 18-year-old. So that makes him an attractive Dershowitz client. And Dershowitz lost that appeal. Appeal was denied, and Tyson ended up serving 3 years, famously in prison for that. From 1976 till 1979, Dershowitz attached himself to the Patty Hearst case. Patty Hearst, the millionaire heiress who was kidnapped by, and you could argue either joined or had Stockholm syndrome with the Symbionese Liberation Army. And Patty Hearst, during this crime spree, changed her name. Said famously that my name is Tanya now. So that checks off a few boxes. Dershowitz lost that case. Her conviction was upheld. She was later pardoned by President Jimmy Carter, but not due to any connection to Dershowitz or any of his efforts. It's just something that Carter did. Michael Milken, who attended the same university I did, and was on, even after his 1990 conviction, was on the wall on the Wharton Hall of Fame. Michael Milken, securities fraud, and he was hit with fraud and racketeering charges related to a series of financial crimes, and Dershowitz came to his defense eventually, but his plea deal was upheld, and he served 2 years, which was reduced from his original 10-year sentence for a variety of financial crimes. And Dershowitz counts this as a partial win. Jeffrey McDonald, there's a nice Christian family name, unchanged. But he gets extra Dershowitz points because he was convicted of killing his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. He took out at least 3 women. So that'll get you on the bingo card. And multiple appeals of his were denied. This was a nationwide famous case in the 1980s, and Dershowitz attached himself to that and lost. I'm going to slow down to try and pronounce this one. Kirtananda Swamy, I believe I pronounced that correctly, was on trial for racketeering and conspiracy to murder. And that, of course, not his real name. The guy was named Ham originally. He was raised Baptist, and that name Ham doesn't exactly sound kosher. Dershowitz, again, not his initial lawyer, but was his lead appellate counsel. And the Hare Krishna leader was convicted on 11 counts. Now, you might be saying that it's refreshing that Dershowitz was defending somebody who, in this case, was convicted of killing 2 or attempted murder of 2 men as opposed to women, until you realize that the reason that Ken Ham was convicted of trying to murder 2 men was that those 2 men were going to go public about the child sexual exploitation ring that Ken Ham seems to have been primarily responsible for. Jonathan Andrew Doody, from 1991 through 2009, he was convicted of 9 murders in a Buddhist temple, including of a Buddhist nun. His convictions were eventually overturned after 15 years served, not because anybody claimed that Doody didn't kill 9 people in a Buddhist temple, but because Dershowitz was able to prove that there were interrogation violations by the police during their investigation. So there's a guy who got out and is, I don't know, might be next to you on the roller coaster at Disneyland. Anatoly Sharansky was on trial for treason against the Soviet Union, and Dershowitz became his lead counsel in international advocacy. Sharansky ended up in Israel, and guess what? Changed his name. O.J. Simpson, you remember O.J., right? Murdered his wife and his wife's friend. Apparently, that's what it's. I can say that because a civil court found that to be the case. So I'm not speaking out of turn there. Dershowitz was not the lead trial lawyer. He was supposed to be an appellate advisor on the Dream Team, and he didn't get to fully participate in getting O.J. off for murdering a woman. Because the jury did. So missed opportunity there. Jeffrey Epstein. Now, of course, Dershowitz was a big buddy of Jeffrey Epstein, not just his legal counsel, but a major part of his defense team. But they seem to have been buddies. Epstein spent a lot of time on the island and that sort of thing. We'll get there momentarily, but. He's one of the people who helped get the Jeffrey Epstein charges. There were 67 counts, including trafficking of minors, and basically Epstein would have spent life in prison. I guess you could argue that, you know, if he was killed in prison, that's what it turned out to be. But yeah, Dershowitz is one of the people that got that busted down to 1 count of sex with a minor who was 17 years. 364 days old at the time. So there's something to be proud of. Harvey Weinstein, who was on trial for sexual assault and rape 2018 through 2020. Dershowitz was a consultant for him. I mean, here's a rich, it's the whole bingo card. It's a rich and famous Jewish man who was accused of abusing his position to commit sexual crimes against a number of women. So that gets you in front of the line. And that was a loss for Dershowitz. He was convicted and had a 23-year sentence, although some convictions were later overturned on appeal. In 2 different Donald Trump impeachment trials, and of course Donald Trump is all over the Epstein files, might be the second only to Epstein himself. Dershowitz was a defense team member and was acquitted by the Senate in 2020 and 2021. The Jewish terrorist Meir Kahane was a client. Meir, of course, not his real first name. He was born Martin, but he changed it. And Kahane is just such a divisive and such a violent and vile figure that actually within Israel in the 1980s, his political party was banned for a while as being too brutally racist for Israel. He claims to have an 87% success rate, although these high-profile cases that I ran through, it's closer to somewhere in a 65 to 70% success rate. It's somewhat better than a coin toss. But there's a claim he made a number of times of having 13 out of 15 wins, and the problem is that you can't find anything about those 13 wins. 2 of the losses that he's counting in the 15 were these high-profile client appellate trials that we know that he lost, and the 13 of them that are wins that he was claiming there for a while in public statements, we don't really you can't get detail on those. Apparently it's like his hot girlfriend who can't make it to prom because she lives in Canada. The picture of Dershowitz, as a genius lawyer, is not backed up by the reality of his practice. He is primarily a law professor. He is primarily somebody who teaches theory and has mixed results in practice. It's a triumph to me of media public persona over reality. You picture the guy who gets innocent people off in their initial trial because they're innocent, and he's Perry Mason, and that's not the case at all. He waits for people to become convicted, people with resources to become convicted. They almost certainly are guilty of what they did, and then he looks for technicalities to get them off. His entire career is built around early 1960s work on police interrogations done unconstitutionally. And by the way, I agree with that. I think that's valuable work, and good for him on that front. But then that's his party trick. Dershowitz for decades has been announced to the public as a civil rights advocate, which I find to be absolutely perverse when you look at his activities for the last 40 years. Every time I see the guy opening his mouth or writing a best-selling book, it is a full-fledged assault on the Bill of Rights. He is absolutely against people's right to free speech, to their right to assembly and protest. He is absolutely mixing religion with the state. If you look at the 4 clauses of the First Amendment alone, Dershowitz has been on the opposite side of all 4 clauses of them rhetorically and in practice for a long time. He takes legal steps, including threats of libel lawsuits, and trying to pull political strings, including reportedly with California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was in office, to try and stop books from being published that he doesn't like the content of. He has opposed the tenure of Norman Finkelstein, for example, one of his intellectual foils. He opposed his tenure in a different university that Dershowitz is not affiliated with, solely based in Finkelstein's political opinions. He has published that he's in favor of something called torture warrants. He has argued in public argument, in books, and in editorials that we should have something called torture warrants, in which he argues that because people who are suspected of terrorism involvement are going to be tortured by the authorities anyway, we may as well have a format for it, which is very strange coming from a man who built a career around improper police interrogations. If you run through the Bill of Rights as I have, Dershowitz seems to be on the opposite side of James Madison on at least 8 of the 10 amendments. And in the cases of ones that have multiple clauses, there are many times when Dershowitz is against some or all of the clauses of those amendments. Dershowitz seems to be against a good 85 to 90% of the Bill of Rights alone, a good deal of the time. And because of this, or in spite of this, is introduced to the public when he's on talk shows, when he's on TV often, as being some sort of civil liberties advocate. Somebody help me make it make sense. There is one frontier that Dershowitz has staked out where he's looking for more liberty, and that is the liberty of dirty old men to have sex with younger and younger people. Back in 1997, the Los Angeles Times, I guess after the editorial board smoked some bath salts or something, allowed him to publish an editorial in 1997 on their editorial page in which he argued for lowering the age of consent to as low as 14 years old. Now, in case you're saying, well, there have been a lot of these unfair cases in which somebody who's 18 years and 1 month old has sex with their significant other who is 17 years and 11 months old, and it seems really unfair to be prosecuting them for a sex crime. If you're thinking it's one of those sliding scale things and reasonable, no. That's not what we're talking about here. He made it explicit in the editorial that there is no upper limit for the older sex partner here. Effectively, that if you're, say, a 68-year-old Harvard law professor, that you should be able to have your way with a 14-year-old, and that's really no business of the state. He goes on to state in this editorial that really, if the age of consent is 14, should we penalize having sex with a 13-year-old as much as an 8-year-old? Well, that doesn't seem fair. Seems like there should be a sliding scale down from there. So maybe 12-year-old, it shouldn't be all that bad. That seems to be the one area of law in which I see Dershowitz arguing for expanded rights.